Villers-Bretonneux is a particular spot in France where maybe one of the last battles took place at the start of the end of World War I. And so when the capitulation of Russia on the Eastern Front meant that the Germans were going to move, or had started to move their troops to the Western Front, things got pretty hectic. And so it was there that the last stand could have taken place. But on the image there you can see where Villers-Bretonneux is. The red line represents the front, and the Germans are making an advance. The Australians put in a magnificent effort. They were commanded by Lieutenant General John Monash. It was the first time Australian troops had been commanded by an Australian. He was very highly regarded by the Australians because he put all of the factors together and made use of them. An effective operation. He used ground troops, tanks, aircraft, etc. in a way which made them super effective. And so in Villers-Bretonneux they still remember the effort made by the Australians, and you can see there that there's a school that says "Don't forget Australia." The school was actually built by donations of money from Australians. The building here is the new monument at Villers-Bretonneux. I think the Australian government put $100 million into it. It's been in the paper in the last few days. And that's the up to it. So, Villers-Bretonneux, and we keep on pronouncing it incorrectly, don't we? It's not Bretonneux, it's Bretonneux or something like that. And the Red Baron, last week 100 years, 21st of April 2018, marked the 100 years since he went off. That's him and his medal, his Blue Max. He was initially a cavalryman. Like a lot of Australians, started off in something else and then converted to the air service, became a fighter pilot in 1917, and he was the leader of what was called the Flying Circus. It was called a Flying Circus because they moved from place to place. As you remember, back as far as Bullen Circus, it used to go from suburb to suburb, and the people lived in temporary accommodation. And so the Red Baron and his troops lived in tents in improvised airfields. And of course that's where the idea of a circus came from. By 1918 he was regarded as a national hero, and he was highly respected by his enemies. Keep out of the way of that red aeroplane, it won't do you any good. He is credited with 80 victories. Some of them were tethered balloons, but we won't take that away from him. And the score of 80 is not particularly high by comparison to some others. However, by the age of 25, he scared the Allied airmen. And there he is in a painting of a low-level chase. He always advised his pilots never to be involved in a low-level chase because you're quite limited. You can't dive out of it and get away from it. You've got to climb. This is an image put out by the Australian War Memorial which describes what happened on that fateful day. The red line traces out where the Red Baron went. So he started here, went down there. About there was a sudden change into a dive and force landed into a field. That's the Red Baron there in the red aeroplane, and in front of him was Wilfred May in a Sopwith Camel. The Baron was right on his tail, and it's amazing that Wilfred May didn't get shot down being in line. This represents the aircraft of the Canadian pilot Roy Brown. Roy Brown came in from, this is all gathered from people on the ground on the day describing what happened. This is Brown, who came in on the Red Baron from the right. The Baron was hit by a bullet from the left. And so while the Canadians tend to hang on to the fact that this bloke, Roy Brown, shot down the Red Baron, many other people don't think that that's the case. Go to Canada, they'll tell you, yes, he did it. On the ground was, at that spot, that little orange spot, was Cedric Popkin, who was a gunner. And up at these two locations, left and right of where the path of the Baron, were two other gunners, Bowie and Evans. The official Australian historian put it down to Popkin firing the shot that took the Baron out. The Baron got a military funeral with honours, and so here's the list of possibility. According to Charles Bean, the Australian historian, official historian, he says it was Cedric Popkin. Bowie says that he may have, because he fired in that direction. Evans was on the right and the Baron was shot from the left. Evans never spoke about it, and therefore it's assumed that he didn't have a great confidence in what he achieved, or whether he did achieve anything in this regard. And of course there's Roy Brown. So there we are, 4 possibilities. That depends which book you read as to who will be responsible, but you really should take notice of the fact that officially Australia recognises Cedric Popkin. In the last week or so, I went into town to have a look at the Red Baron on the Swan River, Red Baron seaplanes. It's flown by Werner Bullman, an ex-instructor from the Aero Club. Some of you would know him. Very popular instructor, very thorough instructor. He left the Aero Club to go to Light Twins and Executive Jets at Perth Airport, and now he's flying the float plane off the river. That's the float plane at its mooring. This is a Black Series of floating contraptions, and there's another series here. So you can walk out on those to the aircraft. The opening here is just wide enough for the aircraft to fit in, and the soft material on the nose of the floats is good enough for it to just come into the landing, which is here. It was interesting to note how Werner brought the aircraft in. The pier, or piers, are quite closely separated, and he probably had about 6 or 7 metres clearance at each wingtip as he taxied in. At about this position here, when the aircraft was under 20 metres away from the mooring, he cut the engine from idle. It was travelling at, I would think, walking pace or a little bit less. He came in here, and this float missed this corner of the landing by mere millimetre, maybe in old-fashioned terms 4 or 5 inches. So the aircraft was losing speed all the way in here until by the time it got into the pier, it was barely moving at all. It could be stopped by one person just putting their hands up against it. So the engine was stopped out there, the aircraft cruised in here and stopped just about short of there. So that's where it is. So if you go into town and you want to have a look at it, and it's fairly active at weekends, I hear it over the river fairly regularly. So make your way down there and have a look. And you can see how narrow it is for access, particularly when there's boats on the other side. To move the aircraft out, it's a matter of pushing it back, and this gentleman here, with one rope tied to a bollard on the float there, gives a nod, and Werner starts the engine in that position. And this gentleman casts off, and the aircraft taxis out. He taxis down nearly to the causeway, so it takes quite a while, turns around, and then applies power for the takeoff. And this brings him up to being well and truly airborne by the time he gets to the path on the South Perth ferry. I would think that if somebody, on the day that I was watching it, he was achieving about 500 or 600 feet by the time he got back to roughly the Barrack Street area.
There we go.